out of Washington. He's the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. He has called on Hegseth to both resign and appear to testify before his committee. Congressman, it's good to have you on the program. Why do you want to hear from Pete Hegseth himself before your committee?
Yeah, well, to be fair, if he resigns, the latter part probably isn't as necessary. But someone from the Pentagon needs to explain what happened. But look, I think it's very clear this is an unacceptable breach of standards to have shared this sensitive information on a group chat that was clearly accessible to outsiders. But then even worse, since then, Hegseth has sort of said, what? There's nothing to see here. And if this is the normal way they handle information that is this sensitive, then that is incredibly problematic. So what we want right now, and what I've asked Chairman Mike Rogers for, is a hearing, to hear from Secretary Hegseth to explain what happened and, crucially, what they're doing to make sure it does not happen again.
This is David French writing an op-ed in the New York Times saying, the best commanders I knew did not ask a soldier to comply with a rule that didn't apply to them. The best commanders led by example. What example has Hegseth set? That he's careless. When you're careless in the military, people can die. If he had any honor at all, he would resign. What do you think this does to the over 1 million individuals that are essentially under his command?
Well, it clearly undermines any sort of sense of the rules and standards that the military is supposed to follow. Look, it's cliche to say this, but if anybody else, within the military had done this, they would have been relieved of duty immediately. There's absolutely no question about that. But it gets to the larger problem within the Trump administration, in my view, and that is Trump has a very simple set of rules. Whatever he does is okay because he did, right. Period. There are no rules, there are no standards, there is no truth. There's what he says. And if he says something opposite 2 minutes later, then both of those things are true. And if that is the way you approach things, you will not have a competently run organization. So it's the Pentagon, certainly, but it's also all the other agencies that are doing one thing. They're trying to be loyal to Donald Trump. They're not focused on being efficient and effective at their jobs because they know that is not what the boss wants. That's not why they were given the jobs that they were given. And this is but one example of how that plays out in a way that undermines, in this case, the security of this country, but just the basic competency and effectiveness of our federal government under Donald Trump.
Let me ask you about the decision-making on display here, aside from the fact of this and where it's happening and the sort of counter-espionage aspects. It does strike me as weird, A, this is happening over a chat, but B, that this debate is happening after presumably a decision meeting with the president. They seem to reference that. And yet the decision isn't clear. Like, this seems an inversion of the way this should normally work.
There's three big weird things about this. One, the commander-in-chief, there's no evidence that he gave the final go, no-go, as you said, that he made that final decision. You've got this interesting group of people that were pulled together kind of going, yeah, I think this is what he wants. What the hell? Let's go ahead and do it. So that's number one. Number two, there's no uniform officer on this chat group. Traditionally, this would be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, whose job is to be the top military advisor to the president. But as you well know, we don't have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because eminently qualified C.Q. Brown was fired because he talked about being a black person 5 years ago during the George Floyd, or the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. So we don't have a chairman. We do have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Why wasn't he involved in this? He is the person who has the most operational intelligence. And then the last part about this, okay, it's bad that Secretary Hegseth was doing this on a group chat. Incredibly bad that he included a reporter. But why is he having this conversation at all once the operation starts? You don't need to talk about it. What Secretary Hegseth needs to be, if someone in the field says, hey, we got a problem, you need to make a decision, it's almost like he got a bunch of frat boys together and said, hey, let's talk about the game because we're not in the same room. You're not supposed to be having this type of conversation during an ongoing operation because there's no need to. Why does anybody, other than the ones doing the operation, need to know that the planes took off or that the missiles were launched or that we're hitting this target? That's not the way this is supposed to be done.
Yeah, that point about the tone, I mean, it's so bizarre because the whole thing has kind of it's like the group chat trying to figure out where to make dinner reservations for 12 at the bachelor party. And there's some sort of back and forth. But again, I want to be serious about one thing that I haven't really seen anyone talk about. You know, according to reports on the ground from the Houthis, and again, I don't, you can discount this or not, but 53 people died. We know from the chat that this was a targeted strike in a building of a girlfriend. Presumably that's a residential building other people are living in. And there doesn't seem to be any contemplation whatsoever about whether that's acceptable, whether that clears the bar.
Right. Two big parts of this. One, and it's what we're not talking about because of the group chat nonsense, what is the mission here? And this is another thing. Mike Waltz was incredibly dishonest at the White House yesterday when he said, well, the American people are just glad that finally we're doing something that Joe Biden didn't have the courage to do. Joe Biden repeatedly bombed the Houthis to try to stop them from interdicting our sea lanes. And it didn't really work. So what we haven't heard from you, how is this working? Other than Waltz and Trump saying, this is the most brilliant accomplishment ever, all went perfectly, everything's fine. It's still going, by the way. We're still bombing on a day in and day out basis. And thus far, there's no evidence that it has stopped the Houthis' ability to threaten those shipping lanes. So yes, and then there is the question of what was the balance in terms of civilian casualties and how that's going to influence the ability to stop the Houthis from doing what they would do. So the operational aspect of this, other than the little TikTok play-by-play that they were giving, has not been fully explained. It hasn't been fully briefed to me. I'm trying to get a brief tomorrow from the Central Command to get into those details. But other than saying it's a spectacular success, everything's fine, there's no details on that, showing that it actually is a success at all.
Congressman Adam Smith, who's the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee in the House. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Still to come, spontaneous protests as the Trump administration just snatched